name is Lyle Best. I'm a family physician, but I've done a fair amount of medical research using a method called epidemiology, which scientists use to learn more about disease. Ever since our ancestors became aware of what we call disease, many have wondered what caused them and how to treat or prevent them. I'm sure that many wise grandmothers knew that healthy people could catch some diseases from people that had them, but that other diseases were not spread this way. This was the beginning of what we now call epidemiology. This is a method of finding out about disease, not only by studying how epidemics travel through a population, but also how and why some diseases are found mostly in certain geographic areas, or why people are exposed to certain things like tobacco smoke or alcohol come down with particular diseases. In 1854, a doctor named John Snow was concerned about a new outbreak of cholera in London. This is a deadly diarrheal disease that had already killed about 70 people in a particular neighborhood of London. Dr. Snow knew that not all of London was affected, and there weren't a lot of cases in the nearby countryside. He went from house to house in this neighborhood talking to family members of victims. What he found was that nearly all of those that came down with cholera had used water from a public well on Broad Street. He also found that there were over 500 people in a neighborhood prison, and only 2 of them had developed cholera, and the prison had their own well. None of the workers in a local brewery had come down with cholera either, and guess what? They drank beer. When Dr. Snow took matters in his own hands and removed the handle from the Broad Street well pump so the local people had to walk to the next nearest well, the epidemic stopped immediately. At the time, all the famous doctors, including Queen Victoria's doctor, knew that cholera was caused by breathing bad air from swamps. But Dr. Snow had shown that it was the water they were drinking, not the air they were breathing. He'd used detailed information from those affected, careful mapping, and eventually an experiment to show that his theory was right. He was also lucky in a sense that he was dealing with a disease that happens over a short period of time. It's easy to diagnose and has a fairly large effect size, meaning that almost 100% of the people drinking from the well got cholera, whereas almost no one drinking from other wells got sick. What Dr. Snow did would today be called a case series. It can teach us a lot, but the next most accurate step would be what's called a case control study. Here one finds a group of people with a disease and carefully matches each case with someone living in the same area, about the same age, maybe the same gender and so on, that doesn't have the disease, a control. You then gather as much information as you can about lifestyle, do some exams, maybe some testing, blood tests and so on, and then begin to explore for any differences between these two groups, those with and without the disease. This is a relatively quick and cheap way to gather preliminary data and to confirm or reject some early hunches. The disadvantage is that the disease has already happened by the time you do your exam, so it's hard to find things that you can be sure happened before the disease occurred. The next most accurate method is called a cohort study. Here you recruit a large number of people to join the study, probably at least 1,000. They're all healthy, they have no sign of this condition. Then you set your trap, so to speak, gathering all the information you can think you will need from these people, examinations, life history, blood testing, other tests and so on. Then you sit back and wait to see who gets sick and who stays healthy. It might take 10 years or so, and sometimes it turns out you didn't have enough people to get a positive result. It's very time-consuming and costly. This method, though, allows you to be sure that the things you found in your exam were there before the person got sick, so they're truly predictive of the future, like a risk factor. The last and most accurate type of study is a randomized controlled trial, or what we would call an experiment or an intervention. Here you randomly enroll a large number of people into 2 groups. Heads, you get the experimental medication, tails, you get the sugar pill, except they usually keep which one you got secret. In fact, in many cases, the doctors that decide whether you got better or not, they don't even know whether or not you got the real medication or the placebo. These kinds of experiments often last a number of years, and during this time, scientists periodically check the statistics to see which group is doing better. As soon as they're sure that it's going one way or another, they stop the experiment. But how do statisticians know if the numbers are convincing enough to stop an experiment? Suppose there were 10 children out of 20, 50%, with a heart problem that had taken a particular medication during the past year. Of 20 children without this heart condition, only 5 or 25% had used this medication. It's a pretty big difference, right? In percentages, 50% versus 25%. Is this suspicious? A statistician would tell us that the chance of finding these numbers without any cause is about 1 in every 5 times, or about the same chance as getting 5 heads and 7 flips of a coin. Not very convincing, right? On the other hand, if all the numbers were just doubled, so that 20 children got sick out of 40, still 50%, receiving the medication, compared with 10 out of 40, 25%, then the chances of this happening just by accident would be only 3 out of 100. This is what's meant by the phrase statistically significant, and it shows the power of increased numbers of participants. At this point, the statisticians would say, it's too dangerous to continue this experiment, it needs to be stopped. Many studies can cost millions of dollars, and so scientists want a pretty good idea if this investment is likely to find a true result. 2 things affect the probability of study giving accurate results, what's called the power of the study. Number 1, how often the disease occurs in a group of people during a certain period of time. And number 2, how big an effect the treatment or the risk factor has on decreasing or increasing the chance that disease will occur. The more people that are likely to get the disease, the fewer people you need to include. The more effective the treatment, the more dangerous the risk factor, the fewer people that are needed in the study. The effect size is also the reason it's essentially impossible to show that a particular risk factor doesn't cause disease. This is because if you do a cohort study with, let's say, 10,000 people for 20 years, and you do not see an increase in disease, it might be because the effect size was smaller than you thought. In other words, your study didn't have enough power. So now you do another study with 1 million people, and you watch them and still don't find an effect. Maybe that's because though your study was much more powerful, it was still too weak to find a slightly smaller effect, or the effect took longer to occur. And on until there are not enough people on the planet to do your study. Randomized controlled trials are considered the very best way of deciding whether a treatment or a risk factor actually increases the risk of disease. If the experiment is successful, people often consider this to be the gold standard scientific proof. This works pretty well for testing medications, but in many cases it would be unethical and very impractical to test risk factors this way. Would you want to sign up for a study of lung cancer where they would force you to smoke a pack a day for 20 years if the coin toss put you in that group, or be forced to give up smoking for 20 years if the toss went the other way? This is one reason that it took so long to convince the tobacco industry and much of the public that smoking causes lung cancer and many other diseases. Because even though there was a mountain of other evidence that smoking causes these conditions, the tobacco companies could always hide behind the fact that there had never been a controlled trial that proved that smoking caused this or that. So I hope this has given you a little better idea about epidemiology and how it can help to inform us about disease and figure out ways to prevent or treat them. Thank you.